when you read Pilgrim's Progress, you're looking at a novel that is not a realistic novel the way we're going to study Moll Flanders and Tristram Shandy and others, but you are looking at a novel that gives you the impression of reality. And one of the questions is how Bunyan goes about doing this. Basically, he takes abstract ideas, or ideas in the abstract, and gives them personalities. Now, this, of course, in traditional form is called personification, or if you want to use the technical Greek term, prosopopeia, P-R-O-P-O-S-O-P-O-E-I-A, prosopopeia. Prosopopeia is one of those 330 rhetorical trope that Puttenham and the art of English poetry in the 17th century identified as special techniques by which a writer can put across his point. He can do it by metaphor, he can do it by irony, he can do it by antithesis, he can do it, among other techniques, by prosopopeia. Now, prosopopeia basically is a way of taking an abstract idea and giving it a personality. So if you say, he has been tempted by lucre, he likes money, then lucre becomes the personification of the desire for money. Or if he has been overcome with wrath, he becomes very angry. Wrath is personified as something that can impose itself on a person's personality. Now, if you take personification, if you take this device of abstracting something and giving it qualities of human beings, then you produce a personified form of prosopopeia, or what we call personified or personification. Now, when a thing personified fills into a much larger matrix of occurrences, when in fact we find that wrath and lucre are both found in Vanity Fair, or in a city of temptation, or in Sodom and Gomorrah, then we see the context of the personification in a larger framework, and that framework, because it stretches into a much different world of its own, is called allegory. Allegory is a system of identifications by which, in the abstract, human emotion is understood. Now, I could repeat that, but I'll not repeat it exactly as I said it, because I probably can't. But allegory is a system of identifications by which human emotions can be understood utilizing abstract terms. There are various ways that you can look at allegory, and various works that may in fact give us a sense of allegory. I had mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah, and you remember the story of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt when she looked back at the burning city. And of course, in Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, Christian actually comes across the pillar of salt that came from Sodom and Gomorrah. He also comes across Moses. He also comes across prophets. Now, considering the fact that the pillar of salt was in Abraham's day, which was at least 1,800 years before the Christian era, and that Moses was 1,300 years before, and that the prophets were Amos about 800 years before, and Jeremiah 600 years before, time means nothing in this allegory. The only thing that's significant is the recognition that the words that draw up thought have an abstraction to them that circumvents and transcends time. And so time is irrelevant. Now, when time is irrelevant, personification and allegory takes on another characteristic. And I'm going to give you another term called typology. Typology. When we use typology, it is a way of using types that precede certain ideas and events to help illustrate those events. For example, a type in the Bible is, of course, Adam. Adam is a sinner, and we find in Pilgrim's Progress that we meet Adam the first major sinner. Now, the reason we differentiate Adam the first from all the others is because all the others are typed after him. If you pick up the famous English work, or the famous Scandinavian work, Beowulf, you discover that Grendel is from the house of Cain. Cain had killed his brother. And so Grendel, coming from the house of Cain, is this horrendous figure who, years after, well, it has to be at least 3,000 years after Cain, 4,000 years, perhaps 5,700 years by Hebrew reckoning, Grendel comes from the house of Cain, is prefigured by Cain, and once we understand he's associated with Cain, we know that he is a venal creature. So that names that appear nowadays, if we find that people are railing against city life, railing against criminal activity, and claiming that Houston or Boston or Austin are bringing back the traditions of Sodom, right away we know that the heinous activity for which those cities were condemned are activities being condemned in our modern day. Now, Valentine Cunningham, who's has written about Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, puts it another way, and I want to read her definition because it's a really interesting definition and relatively difficult. It goes like this. But before I get into that, let me tell you this. When you read allegory, and when you realize that some figure is doing something, that worldly wise man is doing something, and you realize that he's not only doing something, but by typology he's reflecting upon events that occurred in the Bible, and that he's quoting proverbs from the Bible, and that he's referring to contemporary events that may have occurred even in the 17th century. Bunyan himself, a Christian says, I have 4 children. Bunyan had 4 children. When we realize that superimposed upon this figure, Christian or worldly wise men, are glosses from the Bible, are normal proverbs, are historical events contemporary to the author, when we realize that there's a whole system of new information, glosses, glossaries, terminology, references, implicit in the work, then we discover that the allegory is actually made up of a great deal of information culled from many sources, which, while seeming disparate, actually come together as a unified description of a person or a figure's emotions in the sense of personified allegory. So, Ms. Cunningham says this: it comes as no surprise that allegory, the marginal gloss, use the word gloss, you gloss over things, the marginal gloss, and all these glosses are in the margins. that the marginal gloss should be taken as symptomatic of deconstructive textuality. Put that term down, deconstructive textuality. Deconstructive means that whatever you see on paper, you have to avoid taking it literally. You have to deconstruct its meaning and try to figure out all the parts of speech, all the ideas it really signifies. So we're dealing with deconstructive textuality. She goes on to say this, that these are also instructive emblems. Now, we'll talk about emblems in just a moment. These are instructive emblems. All these ideas, the combination of proverbs, the combination of personalities, the combination of ideas, the combination of historical events, are meant to teach you something. And all allegory basically has an instructive purpose. The essence of which is widely valent. Now, valent means you weigh things. So the text is widely valent. Now, what does that mean? It essentially means that when you discover that you're looking at obstinate or pliable or interpreter, that each of you will see people in these names whom you know. You may know more of them, you may know fewer of them. You may have had experience yourself engaging people of this sort. And so you're going to have the ability to weigh the importance or the significance of these names as you read the allegory according to your experience. If you've been cheated in a business deal, then people who desire lucre are going to anger you. And if you had a friend who you thought was very moral and suddenly you discovered the person was did an immoral thing or was uncharitable to you, you have two choices. You can either be obstinate and condemn him, or you can be pliable and accept him and understand human beings' faults. Or you may find yourself again rejecting these figures because you don't want people to be pliable, changing their mind every time something happens, or doing whatever they need to do in order to suit themselves. Now, allegory then deals with an elaborate system of associations. Associations with human characteristics, moral acts, historical events, typological significance, and emblematic truths. And let me so conclude with one other discussion, and that is of the nature of emblems. Emblems are simply pictures of human ideas and human events that have been engraved in books and made available to people to help understand morality or events. For example, an emblem in a 17th century book or a 16th century book might have someone with a crown on his head and the globe behind him cracked. And this becomes an emblem of rulers who are destroying the world. Or you may have, as you've seen, the emblem of justice, who always has a mask across her eyes, because justice must be blind. You must be willing to find guilty those who are guilty, whether they're rich or poor, whether they're friends or enemies, whether they are powerful or whether they are innocent, or whether they're humble but not innocent. Or you must be able to free people who are impoverished and not guilty, as well as people who are powerful and not guilty. And this is an emblem. This is a signification of a certain type of event. Emblems, I would say, are two-dimensional. You can see height and width. Allegories are multidimensional. You see them in three dimensionals and you move in various ways. All right. Now, assuming that we have some idea what allegory is, Pilgrim's Progress gives us a basic allegory, and the allegory is based on a Christian experience. On the one hand, Christian is moving toward recognition of his religious faith, and when he reaches Calvary and his burden falls off and he has seen the cross and he has seen the light, he is essentially newborn or baptized. Bunyan was among those who believed in adult baptism. When you're mature enough to recognize what your faith was, you would then choose to be baptized at an older age, whereas the Anglican Church baptized at birth, or of course shortly after birth, and there's a difference. In fact, Daniel Defoe has a scene in the Family Instructor, which was published in 1715, some years, 27 years after John Bunyan died. Daniel Defoe has a scene where an Anglican woman is sitting in a home where Baptist children are running around, and she's very, very uncomfortable because she knows they haven't been saved yet, and she doesn't feel at all comfortable about sitting in a house where there are unsaved people running about, and this becomes a real point of conflict in that particular work. So you have that movement toward Bunyan's understanding of his a Christian's understanding of his religion. Then what happens in the second half of the book? The second half are those temptations then placed in front of a fideist. I'm going to use the term fideist, who's someone who believes, because I think that basically anyone who's orthodox understands this philosophy. It doesn't matter what your religion you are, but someone who's an orthodox believer is a fideist. Once you believe, and once you know where you stand, and once you know what your faith is, then the question is, how well can you hold on to it? How long can you go before you're backsliding? And consequently, the second half of Pilgrim's Progress is the means by which Christian can be tempted, and the techniques people must use, his friends, to ward off these temptations so that he can finally enter the celestial city. Well, tonight we're going to do three things. The first thing we're going to do is study the nature of allegory, and that'll be about the first third of this program. The second, I'm going to go into the larger meaning of the allegory in terms of our understanding of our culture, how Pilgrim's Progress lets us understand our culture. And then the last part of the evening, we're going to talk about the importance of Pilgrim's Progress in terms of other literature and in terms of other experience. Let's talk first about the people I have on the screen. Can we have a picture of the screen because we can see who they are? Okay, this screen is dark, and let's lighten it up. Is there anything appearing there? All right. I have there the names of some of these characters we're going to look at, and the pages on which you can find the discussion that we're going to talk about. The first thing, of course, is we meet Christian on page 40, and then we trail through this entire experience, finding out what is happening to him. The first thing we discover is that he is a man fleeing from the city of destruction. He has made a decision, and that decision is to leave his children and to leave his family in order to seek a moral life, an honest life. And we see him scurrying about feverishly, steeped in anxiety, and that characterizes one thing about the theist. Number one, the theist is steeped in anxiety. Can you live this life morally with the temptations and with the hazards that you face? The second point is once you operate in this world of anxiety, some people may say it's a world of guilt, particularly when parents and aunts and uncles ask you where you've been this last Sunday, or why you weren't where you're supposed to be, or why you overslept for services. There's always a degree of anxiety, but the second action, the second feature of Christian is his ability to act. Now, as far as religious belief is concerned, you can read everything you want, you can know everything you want, you can study everything you want, but if you don't act on it, you're not fulfilling either the commandments or the religious belief. And so what we're going to do is find that throughout this work, Christian is not only a man of some anxieties, but he's also a man of action. The question is, how real is he? How real is he? And as you begin going through this work, you discover that he's willing to accept friends. To some extent, he's gullible because he talks with equanimity, with talkative, with pliable, with obstinate. He is somewhat foolish. He finds himself at Vanity Fair, and faced with a mob, he can't extricate himself. And he finds that he is going to survive while his friend Faithful is going to suffer a horrible death. But a death ameliorated by the fact that he'll go to heaven. This is a novel to the extent that at various points tension increases and tension decreases. And so when Christian finds himself in the slough of despond and doesn't know how to get out of his plight, he ultimately extricates himself from that first great moment of tension. Then we find him losing his role. The words are supposed to give him guidance. Second point of great tension. Then we find him going to the Vanity Fair, or meeting Apollyon. He defeats Apollyon. Third point of great tension. Then we see him in the castle of despair with the giant of despair. He extricates himself from that situation. Then we find that he may go in directions that avoid the straight path. Again, more tension. You can identify 5 or 6 high points of tension where the novel increases its intensity and increases its tension, and each of these experiences is something that Christian draws us through. Now let's look at another figure, and that is Pliable on page 43. Now Pliable is an interesting fellow. John Bunyan had a problem with people who were pliable. And let me just remark about one of them. Bunyan knew ministers, Puritan ministers, who in 1662 accepted the Book of Common Prayer. The Book of Common Prayer was the book of the Anglican Church. It had been developed by James, rewritten in some aspects by Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, but it was expressively for the Anglican Church. And Puritan ministers, to all extent and purposes, were not supposed to use it. But Bunyan knew those who did. He argued with them. He angered them as they angered him. And he thought they were being pliable. You're not supposed to use books from a different religious faith, particularly one you find onerous. And because the Anglican Church resembled in most instances the Roman Catholic Church, although it was non-papal, it was Episcopal but non-papal, Bunyan didn't like those people. He also didn't like people who agreed to the laws of occasional conformity. The laws of occasional conformity, as I mentioned last week, allowed people to say Mass in the Anglican Church once a year so that you could hold government positions and gain certain emoluments from the government, and then practice whatever religion you desire during the year. Bunyan objected to that too. He objected to occasional conformity. He objected to being pliable to the extent that you forsook the strict rules of your religion and failed to honor them. Look at the bottom of page 42 where Pliable is talking. Pliable says to Obstinate, well, let's look at Obstinate's first speech at the bottom of page 42. Obstinate says, "Come then, neighbor Pliable, let us turn again and go home without him," without Krishna. He won't go with us. "There's a company of these crazed-headed coxcombs that when they take fancy by the end are wiser in their own eyes than 7 men that can render a reason." Pliable says, "Don't revile. If what the good Christian says is true, the things he looks after are better than ours. My heart inclines to go with my neighbor." Of course, he's going to go whichever way the wind blows. And so Pliable says, well, that's the way he feels, I'll go with him. If Obstinate gives him a persuasive argument, he says, okay, I'll go with you. Let's see what happens. "What," says Obstinate, "more fools still? Be ruled by me and go back. Who knows whither such a brain-sick fellow will lead you? Go back, and be wise." And Christian says, "Come with me, neighbor Pliable. There are such things to be had which I spoke of, and many more glories beside." Well, neighbor Obstinate, says Pliable, I begin to come to a point. I intend to go along with this good man and to cast my lot with him. And you've got that little equivocation that goes on there. I'm sure you've done it on occasions. You didn't want to do something, but a friend of yours said, let's do it, and so you decided to go along, and someone else persuaded you to do something different. So we're seeing real personalities here. We're seeing real people. Now, the fact that these are personified allegories then begs the next question. How do they become real people? The language here is actually a low style of language. It's conversation. If you want to write conversation in plays or short stories that you yourselves are writing, one way to do it is to sit next to people who are talking. Go into a cafeteria and edge next to a table with your notebook in hand. And as people are talking, write down exactly what they say and listen to the rhythms of their speech. Bunyan is actually giving us speech rhythms. Now, these speeches are longer than what people would normally say in modern context. They're certainly longer than many of the speeches you would get in Shakespeare. They seem somewhat artificial, but there's enough inflection, there's enough rhythm, there's enough speech to tell us that these are real people. And so let's move on and look at worldly wise men at page 53. Worldly wise man is a person who's wise in the ways of the world. That doesn't mean he's smart. He knows how to get along. Someone told me years ago that juvenile delinquents are brilliantly and worldly wise because they know how to do things, they know how to get away with things, they know how to beat the system until they hit the age of 18. And then if they continue that way, they become fairly dumb. And among other things, they may be arrested or they may move into a life of crime. But they don't seem as smart when they're adults as they were when they were youngsters. Who is worldly wise man? Evangelist tells us on page 53. He tells Christian, I will show thee who it was that deluded thee, and who it was also to whom he sent thee. The man that met thee is one worldly wise man. Now here's who he is. And rightly he is so called, partly because he favoreth only the doctrine of this world. Therefore he always goes to the town of morality to church, and partly because he loveth that doctrine best, for it saveth him from the cross. He's not going to suffer, and he's not going to sacrifice himself, but he is going to find a way to get along in the world. Because he is of this carnal temper, his body rules him. He's going to make sure that he gets along, and it has nothing to do with what faith is or what morality is. Therefore he seeketh to prevent my ways, though my ways are right, says evangelist. Now evangelist, of course, is the preacher, and he finds that he's got to worry about worldly wise men. Sometimes when you watch the ministers on TV, such as PTL, among them Jimmy Baker, right? You get both evangelist and worldly wise men. And that's a combination that is disastrous because it not only can deceive, but it can disappoint. Let's look at interpreter at page 61. Now there's a very famous edition of the Bible called the Interpreter's Bible. And it's really a good, we have it in our library. What it does is give you very, very long essays describing in specific passages of the Bible, all the books of the Bible that you may wish to learn more about. Interpreter is the person who can clean house. He can remove all doubts. He can remove all dross. He can remove all confusion. He can avoid confusion. And that's what he exactly does. On page 61, he cleans house. This parlor is the heart of man, says interpreter, that was never sanctified by the sweet grace of the gospel. That dust is his original sin, and inward corruptions that have defiled the whole man. He that began to sweep at first is the law, but she that brought water and did sprinkle it is the gospel. That's a rather interesting thing. Anyone can say the law, and the Mosaic law, the apodictic decree, the Ten Commandments, is the basic law. You can bring the law and you can put it down. The law is covered with dust in the original sin. It is obfuscated. It is unclear. But those of you who sweep, I did when I was in the Army. I haven't done it since, I'm afraid to say. But when you used to sweep in the Army, the sergeants used to yell at you if you didn't throw water on the floor because dust spread everywhere. So we learned to sweep with water on the floor, and it kept down the dust. it's a very mundane thing. In fact, at one point when when it was very cold outside, we had to go out on maneuvers, some of us swept for hours and hours at a time. The same boards on the same floor, just to stay indoors. But it's kind of interesting to hear Bunyan tell us through interpreter that the Mosaic law is obfuscated by dust, but it's the woman, the gospel, who comes in, who knows what to do. Put that water down, lay the dust away, sweep the floor clean, and you'll know what it's all about. So you need the gospel in order to teach you the truth, in order to let you see through the dust. And interesting that when I talk about allegory, this is the gloss. This is bringing into the Bible. You never saw Sarah sweep the floor, right? You never saw Ruth sweep. You never saw Deborah sweep or Judith. People don't do those things in the Bible, but they do them in Bunyan, because now we're dealing in the field of allegory. And so let's look at the children on page 61. You have two children. One is passion and one is patience. Now those are nice names for children, passion and patience. Of course, these are allegorical names. You wouldn't call your child passion. You would call yourself passionate over your child, but you wouldn't call the child passion. You might call the child patience. What child is called Patience in a very famous novel? Or am I mistaken? What's the name of the child in The Scarlet Letter? Is it not Patience? Pearl. Okay. Okay, I don't know why Patience came to mind, but maybe Pearl was being patient. All right. That's the gloss of association. You begin to make associations, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But in this case, interpreter comes up with two children. One is passion and one is patience. Now, what that shows us is not twins necessarily, although these may be twins, but the dual personality of any human being. If you're passionate, you do things arbitrarily. You do things in haste. You do things without thinking. You do things because you're motivated by emotion and not by reason. And people who are passionate may find themselves rapidly moving into folly, into vice, into temptation. Whereas patience is required as the alternative behavior. If you can be patient, if you can think things through, if you can take your time, then of course you are going to reach salvation, as Christian does. Look on the top of page 62 and see exactly what Bunyan tells us. I saw, moreover, in my dream that the interpreter took him by the hand and had him into a little room where sat two children, each one in his chair. The name of the eldest was Passion, and of the other, Patience. Passion seemed to be much discontent, but Patience was very quiet. I mean, these are very simple lessons that are being taught, but they're quite profound. Good question. If you ask a question, I think you're supposed to press the button so people in the studios outside of this can hear you. So would you repeat that? Just push the button down.
Was there any significance in passion being the elder?
That's a very good question. Is there any significance in passion being the elder? I haven't thought about that before you asked me, but ask yourself, who are the elders in the Bible who run into problems? Esau is the elder, right? He's the passionate one. Cain, the elder. He's the passionate one. Of Aaron and Moses, Moses is the younger. And he's more passionate. He gets angry. It would be interesting to investigate. It's very possible that there may, if you look in a book called Folk Motifs by Stith Thompson and look under elder or elder child, you may find out that the elder one comes out first because he's more impatient amongst twins. So if you have any situation where you have twins and one comes out first, generally you might find that true. It's interesting. I can bet you, and it's a good question, I can bet you that Bunyan probably has some kind of precedent he was thinking about when he made Passion the Elder. There's another reason, and that's as good a reason as any. Christian asked, what is the reason of the discontent of passion? Interpreter answered, the governor of them would have him stay for his best things till the beginning of the next year. But he will have all now. But patience is willing to wait. Now this has religious significance. Let's go on. Then I saw that one came to Passion and brought him a bag of treasure and poured it down at his feet, the which he took up and rejoiced therein, and withal laughed Patience to scorn. But I beheld but a while, and he had lavished all away, and had nothing left him but rags. So Passion, having this wealth, spends it too fast. A lesson to all of you when you win that lottery, that $18 million lottery tomorrow night, right? Don't spend it too fast. Otherwise you will be convicted by Bunyan for being too passionate. The truth of the matter is that passion will not get to heaven, and patience will. And that is essentially the allegorical meaning of this story. Let's move a little bit, all right, and look at some of these other examples. And go to we're going to bypass Apollyon right now, who is the beast and the devil incarnate. Well, let's go to Apollyon, page 89. Among the hazards that Christian must face is this devil figure Apollyon. Now, there are many figures in literature, beasts with multiple faces. Elijah, we know, sees a being with 4 heads, or 4 faces on one head. Here on page 89, we meet Apollyon. I go to page 90. Who is Apollyon? He is the devil incarnate. And Apollyon meets Christian. Now the monster was hideous to behold. He was clothed with scales like a fish, and they are his pride. He had wings like a dragon, feet like a bear, and out of his belly came fire and smoke, and his mouth was as the mouth of a lion. When he was come up to Christian, he beheld him with a disdainful countenance, and thus began to question him. Now Christian finds himself faced with this being who is going to wage war against him. And Apollyon is not going to let him pass. There are many instances where we have dragon-like figures. St. George fought the dragon, and when he won, he healed his wounds with leaves from a miraculous tree. And we find out, too, that when Christian wins and beats Apollyon, he, too, restores his wounds with leaves from the tree of life. The fight begins on page 93. And I suppose what you have here is Van Damme or Schwarzenegger giving us all against the monster. Before computerized enemies and computerized television, I'm not sure how they would depict Apollyon in Pilgrim's Progress. But everyone knew who Apollyon was because you would see figures like him in bestiaries. A bestiary is a book about mythical animals. And if you can dream up a centaur, a man with a figure with half man's body and half horse's body, or you can come up with Pan with half man's body and half goat's body. If you can come up with fire-breathing dragons to fight Beowulf, then surely you can find dragons ready to fight Christian. We don't have dragons in our society, but we have fears that are equal to the fear of dragons. And the dragon is not so much an actual being as it is a fear which has been allegorized. By the way, there are all kinds of dragons. The best dragon in literature is the Beowulf dragon. He's very long, he has wings and flies, and he also breathes fire. I mean, that's all three attributes that great dragons have. Apollyon doesn't breathe fire, I don't think, so we don't get the full dragon effect. But let's see what Apollyon does when Christian faces him in battle. Apollyon straddled quite over the whole breadth of the way and said, I am void of fear in this matter. Prepare thyself to die, he says to Christian, for I swear by my infernal den that thou shalt go no further. The ultimate obstacle, the ultimate fears, and he may be purely chimeric. He may never be there, but it may be Apollyon's fear. You know, we don't, when we walk where there are street lights. We walk in relatively concrete paths and safe paths. In the 17th century, there were no street lights. You went from your home to a neighbor's home, even half a block, and there's no telling what could have happened. You could be beaten by burglars. You could be attacked by thieves. Samuel Pepys in 1660, in his diary, which ran from 1660 to 1669, which was the time during which, it was prior to Bunyan's going to jail, but he lived at the same time as Bunyan. He came out to discover that someone was attempting to rape his wife in a stagecoach, and the coachman beat off the rapist, and he was caught and sent to jail. But that's a 17th century experience, and Pepys was a man of high government office who had all the safety precautions he could take. So the kinds of fears that exist today exist in Apollyon. Thou shalt go no further. Here will I spill thy soul. Now mind you, Apollyon is not just going to tear out his heart, rip off his arms, cut off his head. He's going to spill his soul. That's the ultimate. To rid himself not only of body but of soul as well. And that's a terrible thing, because all Bunyan ever wanted to do was to save souls. Here's a figure who wants to kill the soul. But Christian, and with that he threw a flaming dart at his breast. At least he didn't have one of those metal stars to throw, right? But Christian had a shield in his hand with which he caught it, and so prevented the danger of that. Then did Christian draw, for he saw 'twas time to bestir him, and Apollyon as fast made at him, throwing darts as thick as hail, by the which, notwithstanding all that Christian could do to avoid it, Apollyon wounded him in his head, his hand, and foot. Once Christian is wounded in his hand and his foot, what do you think about? Sure, it's a stigmata. Why he wasn't wounded in the side, I'm not sure. But that's what we have. Right away, the allegory comes playing back at you. Apollyon wounded him in his head, his hand, and foot. This made Christian give a little back. Apollyon therefore followed his work amain, and Christian again took courage and resisted as manfully as he could. This sore combat lasted for about half a day, even till Christian was almost quite spent. For you must know that Christian, by reason of his wounds, must needs grow weaker and weaker. Then Apollyon, espying his opportunity, began to gather up close to Christian, and wrestling with him, gave him a dreadful fall. And with that, Christian's sword flew out of his hand. Then said Apollyon, I am sure of thee now. And with that, he had almost pressed him to death, so that Christian began to despair of life. But as God would have it, while Apollyon was fetching off his last blow thereby to make a full end of this good man, Christian nimbly reached out his hand for his sword, and caught it, saying, Rejoice not against me, O mine enemy, when I fall, I shall arise. And with that gave him a deadly thrust, which made him give back as one that had received his mortal wound. And so, Apollyon, yelling and hideous roaring, spoke like a dragon, and sighs and groans. And he spoke like a dragon, but on the other side, Christian sighed and groaned because he had taken a life. He had wounded Apollyon with his two-edged sword. Now, when the battle was over, Christian gives thanks to his God, of course. What does that tell us? Another Christian writer at the time, John Milton, the poet, wrote an essay called Of Education. And he said in his essay, every man must prepare himself for public and private duty in peace and in war. Not only must you live this life, but you must protect yourself. You must be able to defend yourself. If you have to go in the army, there are two types of ways there are two reasons you should go in the army according to Deuteronomy, according to the Bible. One is if you're going to protect your family. That's one. Well, let me put it. If you are going to protect your life, your family, or your country, then you are obliged to go to war. If you are fighting only to aggrandize the country or to increase its land size, you don't have to go. That's a judgment call. But you've got to be prepared. You've got to be prepared to defend yourself. And by the way, this philosophy goes on well through the 18th century. In Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations in 1776, 100 years later, Smith says, the first objective of a country, the first aim of a country, and the first duty of a country is its defense. If you can't defend yourself, you have no country. If you can't defend yourself, you have no faith. And that's why so many people maintain a militancy in their faith, because they've got to defend their principles. And Christian does it against Apollyon. Let's look at a few more of these figures and see what kinds of allegorical figures we're looking at. And let's go to, we can look at the daughters of Adam the first on page 104. Adam the first has 3 daughters. One, for all of you who are interested in the love connection, is the lust of the flesh. That's the one daughter's name, the lust of the flesh. The other is the lust of the eyes, and the other is the pride of the flesh. By the way, the feminist argument may feel that Bunyan is somewhat prejudiced against women. But to get the other side, you have to read the second part of Pilgrim's Progress, which is the heroics of Christiana. So if you don't like the feminist approach in Pilgrim's Progress, the first part, then you go to the second part, and you realize that he had great respect for his wife and for the women who were militant in his life. Let's look at another type of figure. And can we get this on the screen for a moment? This is judge and jury on page 132 and 133 in the land, in the city of Vanity Fair. Now, I mentioned to you that Adam Smith says the first purpose of a country, the first obligation of a country is its defense. The second obligation of a country is its system of justice. This is in 1776. If you don't have an honest system of justice, if you don't have judges who are honest, if you don't have juries that make decisions based on the evidence, if you don't protect the innocent and seek to convict the guilty, then you don't have a good system of justice. That's why we pay our judges a lot of money, so they're not going to get bribed, or we hope they won't be bribed. And those who are bribed are dishonest. They're defiling the system. Well, look at the jury in the city of Vanity Fair that is going to convict faithful of crimes such that faithful is killed, is executed and put to death. And let's look at this on page 104. Who are the members of the jury? And ask yourself, if you went into traffic court, or you blindsided someone, or you were in court, how would you like to have this jury in front of you? Number 1, Mr. Blind Man. He doesn't want to see anything and can't see anything if he wanted to. Mr. No Good. He's a man of no principle whatsoever. These are all on that jury about to convict faithful. Mr. Malice. Mr. Malice says, when I got hit on my motorcycle, I had to pay my own hospital bills. This guy who's on jury, he's going to pay. Malice is going to come back. He's going to get even with the system. Mr. Lovelust. Mr. Heady. Mr. High Mind, who's these are all the figures who you don't want on your jury. Mr. Enmity, he hates everybody. And no matter what argument the lawyer gives, he's going to say, you're a liar. But sitting on the jury with him is Mr. Liar, who doesn't believe anyone. And the reason he doesn't believe anyone because he doesn't tell anyone the truth. Kipling, in the 19th century, has an essay called Independence, where he says, I would have loved to have seen the face of the first liar in the world when he discovered that just by telling a lie, the enemy are coming, he could see everyone scurrying up trees. He said, what a sense of power the first liar in the world must have had. But then he says, but if I had my preference, I'd rather than see the face of the first liar in the world, when he discovered his sense of power telling a lie, I'd like to see the face of the first liar in the world when he met the second liar in the world. Well, this is not a healthy jury, and what do? They take faithful and they convict him. Page 104 is the famous scene in which, page 133 is the scene in which Faithful is convicted. And 134 is his sentence. And what did they do to Faithful? First, they brought him out according to their law. Then they lanced his flesh with knives. After that, they stoned him with stones. Then pricked him with their swords. And last of all, they burned him to ashes at the stake. Thus came Faithful to his end. Now I saw that there stood behind the multitude a chariot and a couple of horses waiting for Faithful. So soon as his adversaries had dispatched him, he was taken up into it and straightway was carried up through the clouds with sound of trumpet the nearest way to the celestial gate. And there we have the story of Faithful. All right. I want to look at one more set of characters in order to conclude this particular discussion, and that is, at Doubting Castle, the giant Despair and his wife Diffidence. Now there you have a real couple. The giant Despair meets Christian and Hopeful, throws them into a dungeon, and it's very much like the dungeon that Bunyan himself was thrown into when he was in jail. It's very much like the jailers he might have had who would beat the Puritans in jail, some of whom I told you were there for 11 years and some who were there for longer, because they would not preach according to the Book of Common Prayer. And we move now to the last figure. Now, it's very interesting, and you ask yourself, there we are on page 151, the giant Despair and his wife Diffidence. The giant captures Christian Hopeful, throws him in the dungeon, and then in bed he's having a nice conversation with his wife. What shall we do with these people? He's asking his wife's advice. Now, I think it's very nice. This is a happily married couple who are devious, who are deadly, who are mean-spirited, who are uncharitable, who lack mercy, but they are a happily married couple. And the conversation is really a very interesting one. On page 150, the giant Despair beats Christian Hopeful in the jail. And towards evening, the giant, on page 154, towards evening, the giant goes down into the dungeon again to see if his prisoners had taken his counsel. But when he came there, he found them alive, and truly alive was all. For now, what for want of bread and water, and by reason of the wounds they received when he beat them, they could do but little breathe. Well, that night, he meets with his wife. Look at the conversation. Now, night being come again, on page 155, about midway down, and the giant and his wife being in bed, she asked him concerning the prisoners, and if they had taken his counsel. To which he replied, they are sturdy rogues. They choose rather to bear all hardship than to make away themselves. Then said she, take them into the castle yard tomorrow, and show them the bones and skulls of those that thou hast already dispatched, and make them believe ere a week comes to an end, thou also wilt tear them in pieces, as thou hast done their fellows before them. She's a plotter. She's a planner. She probably reads the ads before she goes to the grocery store to make sure that she has the lowest price. She's really a woman of some perspective. And instead of beating them, she comes up with the other plot. Threaten them, cajole them, show them the consequences. She's very clever. She ought to take care of his bank account for him. Well, Pilgrim's Progress gives us the allegory, and it transforms prosopopoeia into human figures. Now I'm going to go back to one more thing before we go into the next portion. Go back to page, let's see, 139. Remember I told you that one of the features of allegory is to bring in all kinds of ideas, all kinds of actions, all kinds of activities, all kinds of materials from your reading, and make it part of the allegory so that everyone understands it and seems comfortable with it. Well, here we have Mr. Hold the World. And Mr. Hold the World is talking to by-ends who will do anything for any end. And look what he tells, look what advice he gives by-ends, right? Look at the advice he gives them. He says, "Aye, and hold you there still, good Mr. by-ends, for by my part, I can count him but a fool that having the liberty to keep what he has, shall be so unwise as to lose it." First aphorism. That came out of an aphoristic book. Next, "Let us be wise as serpents. 'Tis best to make hay when the sun shines." Now, Bunyan never wrote that. It was just a saying in his day. He throws in the aphorisms. Because Hold the World isn't original. He just takes from the world what the world says. "You see how the bee lies still all the winter and bestirs her then only when she can have profit with pleasure in the summer? God sends sometimes rain and sometimes sunshine. If they be such fools to go through the first, yet let us be content to take fair weather along with us." So take the rain or the shine. When I was a college student, I used to deliver furniture, lift refrigerators and things like that. And on bad days when it was snowing, we'd all lament the fact that it was snowing, and our boss would say, "Well, look, if it's snowing out, if it's raining out, if it's sleeting out, if there's an electrical storm, you're going to go out. So don't complain about the weather. Just do it." He says, because if it's snowing outside or sleeting outside or raining outside, you get your paycheck inside. That's a good lesson. "For my part, I like that religion best that will stand with the security of God's good blessings unto us. God has bestowed upon us the good things of this life." And he goes on and on and on to make these aphorisms. There's an interesting edition of Pilgrim's Progress. It's the definitive edition by Huary and Sharrock. It's in our library. The number is PR 3330 A2W5. And it's a gloss. If you open up a page, every page lists the statements in Pilgrim's Progress that are actually quotations or allusions to phrases from the Bible. So if you wanted to trace every phrase from the Bible that's mentioned in Pilgrim's Progress, which was traditional in the Puritan works, you can find it there. All right. PR 3330 A2W5. And it has a nice set of notes at the end to help explain things. Those of you who feel that you want to continue with Pilgrim's Progress for your critical paper, this book is a good one to use. Right now, Ms. Kerr has it. What I'd like to do now, as we move into the second major part of this discussion, is to talk about what the cultural phenomena are that make this book so interesting. And I think as you proceed through the book, you may find a lot of interesting moments that you hadn't really expected. So let me put another thing on the screen for you. All right. All right, can we look at this on the screen now, please? This is a moving over. Any good piece of writing, and we'll discuss this right after the break, every good piece of writing will help you see and learn ideas about government, religion, economics, art or architecture, science and engineering, education, and social behavior. Now, whatever field you're interested in, if you're an economics major, you could actually go through a good book and pick out all the information it gives you about economics and not only get yourself some interesting information, but you can write an interesting paper. For this first critical paper and for the research paper, you can actually focus on one of these 5 topics: government, religion, economics, art, science and technology, education, or social behavior, and find yourself a way of proving to me and proving to yourself the importance and significance of the literature that's under study. After the break, we'll study what I call the GREASES, G-R-E-A-S-E-S, which is the acronym for these 5 major topics. And then perhaps you'll have some questions. But I'm going to go through Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress point by point and show you how much information this allegory is conveying far beyond the principles of character development itself. All right?